In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful. Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing great. You're watching FOADEBATE. We are living through one of the most crucial moments in modern history. The United States and the Israeli regime have launched a war against the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is a war waged through military threats, economic siege, cyber attacks, assassination, and covert operations. But now there are talks, negotiations to end this war. But the recent developments between the United States and Iran paint a picture less of a clear path toward an agreement and more of a paradoxical, multi-layered situation. To help us unpack this ambiguity and better understand the legal, political, and strategic dimensions of these negotiations, I'm honored to be joined by Professor Richard Falk, one of the world's most respected scholars of international law and a courageous critic of U.S. and Israeli policies in West Asia. Thank you so much, Professor Falk, for being here.
I'm happy to be here and look forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much. Given that a memorandum of understanding has reportedly already been signed and a formal agreement to end the war is set to be finalized this Friday, yet Israel has already violated that initial understanding multiple times and continues to carry out heavy strikes on Lebanon. How realistic do you think it is that we'll actually get a deal? And assuming it is signed, how fragile do you expect this agreement to be?
Well, those are very haunting questions that are difficult to answer with any confidence. I think the issue is whether Israel wants to take the risks of being defiant toward the Trump-led initiative to find a way to end the conflict with Iran, and whether the pressures on Trump, which you correctly describe as contradictory, are relevant to how he handles the relationship with Israel. Because what your question focuses on is, can one find a reliable way of including Israel in these supposed conflict-ending negotiations? And that's far from clear, because Israel has an interest and is under pressure not to appear to be pursuing a path that is dictated by Washington, and at the same time, it needs Washington in order to maintain its belligerent posture toward various forces in West Asia. So we're at, as you say, a critical juncture in this constellation of conflicting forces and motivations that have made so much destruction and so great an interference with the normal lives of the peoples living in the region. So I'm more confident that Iran speaks with a clear voice than I am of either Israel or the United States. And you have to bring into the picture Trump's style of carrying on international diplomacy, which is more in the spirit of a poker game than a chess match. He mixes proposals and predictions with threats, and calls off the threats at the last moment, kind of making the threat appear as a bluff. But because of his unstable temperament, one never knows whether that bluff will at some point become a reality. So it makes a very unsteady situation that is far from trustworthy.
Yeah, you're right. And basically, what is the legal and political framework for such negotiations? How should Iran approach these talks without legitimizing the aggression?
Well, that's the problem. On the one side, I think Iran wants to and is entitled to portray itself as the victim of aggression and to demand certain kinds of reassurances that the effects of the aggression will be corrected in terms of how this peace process evolves. But on the other hand, it wants to avoid any escalation of the conflict, and that's certainly part of the calculations that Tehran has to make because of the way in which Trump handles diplomacy. He did the same kind of thing in presenting Hamas with an ultimatum in relation to Gaza, and it sort of worked on that level that Hamas went along with a very unsatisfactory framework for negotiating the future of Gaza. And it did so because of the extreme suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza and the interest it had in finding a way to translate Palestinian resilience into a meaningful form of political resistance. Now, I don't know that the Iran calculations are of a comparable kind, but having suffered this second war, we have to remember there was a war just about a year ago, the so-called 12-day war, and Iran at that time really didn't try to respond in a meaningful way and apparently thought that it could trust the ceasefire. But that was broken in the midst of negotiations that the Oman mediator interpreted as being on the verge of success. And so it's very difficult for Iran to trust any kind of arrangement. And the fact that the terms here of this memorandum of understanding, so-called, have not yet been made public, in one way adds to a certain level of uncertainty, because all along the U.S. has alleged that the parties were on the verge of agreement, and Iran has said there is no agreement as yet. We have not had our basic demands satisfied. And so this is a unprecedented kind of incoherent negotiations up to this point. And what lies ahead is also in a kind of fog of diplomacy. People talk about a fog of war, but this is a fog of diplomacy that makes it very difficult for a government to act responsibly toward these competing considerations of ending a destructive conflict and trusting its adversary to respect the framework that has been agreed upon. and not resume at some later point a further aggression.
I have another question. You have long argued that unilateral sanctions are acts of economic warfare that violate international humanitarian law. The US has strangled Iran's economy, including medicine and food imports. If sanctions are part of the war, should the lifting of all sanctions be a non-negotiable condition for a ceasefire? And how do we ensure that promises are kept?
Well, those are two very difficult questions because one can't achieve any kind of certainty, and in the best of circumstances. And the background of the relationship with both the US and Israel for Iran does not give rise to any confidence that would justify trust. And without trust, one can't calculate what the balance between these considerations are. For instance, how important is it to take a chance that an inadequate framework will at least relieve the people of Iran from the menace of continuing warfare and devastation? In other words, given the distrust, should Iran even so take a calculated risk that it's worthwhile to give this new agreement a chance to succeed? And of course, that chance to succeed would be greatly enhanced if the US were to signal its seriousness by lifting the sanctions altogether and making Iran feel that on this occasion it's committed to a new kind of relationship with Iran. From Iran's point of view, it might not make sense to say they are non-negotiable demands. It may better be phrased as negotiable priorities and long deserved action that really does nothing more than to fulfill the US obligations to respect international humanitarian and economic law.
Yeah. Looking at history from Korea to Vietnam to Iraq, the US has often used negotiations to buy time, impose conditions, or regime change. Based on your experience, what are the warning signs that negotiations are being used as a cover for continued pressure? And what guarantees actually work?
Well, again, it's extremely difficult to penetrate this fog of diplomacy to know what is fundamentally at stake, because on the surface, it would seem that delay works against the interests of the US because it creates inflated prices all over the world, and it creates this supply chain problems and spreads the scope of the conflict. So, and it was an unpopular war in the US to begin with. And now that it's not only unpopular and expensive, it's a failure from the perspective of what it sought to achieve. Trump has a political incentive to end this situation as soon as he can. And that the sort of editorializing of the media in the US has emphasized the need to find some way of implicitly acknowledging the failure and getting off this no-win situation that has emerged. On the other hand, as you suggest, the U.S. has often tried to exact new concessions by using the negotiating process as a way of persuading its adversary that if it really wants an agreement, it has to do thus and so. On the other hand, it has generally tried to escape from these no-win conflict situations. And I think the most illuminating escape example is that of Vietnam, where on the one side it had all the military advantages and dominance, and on the other hand, it came to appreciate that it couldn't look toward a favorable political outcome at a satisfactory political and economic cost. And so it did seek a way out as quickly as it could achieve it without fully exposing itself to the impact of it, the political failure. And of course, Vietnam and Korea to some extent also presented a different political challenge because of the American lives lost in a futile and unsuccessful conflict. In Vietnam, there were over 58,000 Americans killed. And in Vietnam, in Korea, there was the sense there that is lacking in these other situations, including Vietnam and Afghanistan, Libya, and a series of other places. In Korea, there was at least a kind of narrative that cast the U.S. in the role of defending a political entity against aggression or attack. And that narrative was successful in sustaining American political support for the war. So you didn't face the pressures that the U.S. government is under now in relation to Iran, or earlier in relation to Vietnam, where the anti-war pressures from below and within the leadership circles was such that it gave a strong incentive to make negotiations successful in the shortest possible time.
If negotiations fail and the war continues, what are the most dangerous scenarios militarily, economically, and regionally?
Well, if it continues, it will harm the political prospects of Trump. And since he seems temperamentally unable to accept defeat or to acknowledge defeat, it will create strong temptations to do what he's done in the past, which is threaten genocidal assaults on Iran. But in this circumstance, the failure of the threats in the past undoubtedly will create a temptation to actually carry out the threats. And that could lead to, of course, terrible devastation and suffering, destruction. So that that's why I have been saying, even if it's not such a good agreement from Iran's point of view, dealing with a nuclear power like the U.S. led by Trump might justify a calculation that it's better to take a chance with an imperfect agreement than to defer negotiations until a satisfactory agreement can be attained. I just don't know.
Okay, and conversely, if a genuine agreement is reached to end all hostile actions, what would a just and lasting peace look like? Can such a peace exist without addressing the root cause, I mean, US-Israeli hegemony in the region?
I don't think so, at least unless there's a break between the U.S. and Israel of such deep character that it leads Israel to rethink its own destiny in the region. And there's no sign of that happening in the near future. So I think it is correct that the root causes involve not only Israel, but the captive nature of the government in Israel, which adheres to an extreme version of Zionist ideology. And that ideology premises security on the absence of any potential regional threat to itself. It's a kind of preventive war mentality that strikes first and is very belligerent, as it's shown relation to a series of neighboring countries. And that will be very damaging, of course. That will not generate any kind of regional peace for West Asia. And the future, I think, really does depend on addressing this root cause. And the question becomes, how can it be effectively addressed given the various considerations at play, including Israel being a nuclear weapon state that is probably capable of apocalyptic action if its security is genuinely placed at risk, or it sees itself as needing to exhibit this kind of unrestrained violence in order to sustain its own existence. So one has some very inflammable dimensions to this present situation, which seems relatively calm and under control, and we have to wait to see what is disclosed on Friday, and we have to see whether whatever is disclosed, it includes Israel's acquiescence or defiance. Either one will profoundly disrupt or stabilize what U.S. and Iran agree to.
You're right. Thank you so much for your precious words. Any final thoughts?
No, I only would say that I wish that there was a way that one could confidently predict peace with justice for the Palestinian people, for the Islamic Republic of Iran, and for the region as a whole. But I feel that we have to maintain a very vigilant attitude toward these developments now underway, and can't become prematurely optimistic about the future. And so my prayers and hopes are for peace with justice for the region, but I just don't know whether that is going to unfold as I would wish.
Thank you so much, Dr. Falk.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I benefited from our conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. God bless you. Bye-bye.